Production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by
DHG is a full-service accounting firm serving Memphis and the Mid-South region for more than 60 years, combining community involvement with the technical resources of a national firm. For more information, visit dhgllp.com.
the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
The present and the future of the Memphis Airport, tonight on Behind the Headlines. I'm Eric Barnes, publisher of the Memphis Daily News. Thanks for joining us. I'm joined tonight by Scott Brockman, CEO of the Memphis Airport Authority. Thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
And also Pace Cooper, the newly elected chairman of the Memphis Airport Authority Board. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
We talked recently, Scott, we saw each other at an event, and you are, I think it's fair to say, but you can put it in your own words, as optimistic about the airport, about what's going on now, where things are going, as you've been in a long, long time. Why?
We've got a lot of great things going on. Air service is starting to come together. We've, I believe, reached the end of the Delta changes. And now we're building on what I believe is going to be a sustainable air service model. Growth of our existing carriers in not only additional flights, but also gauge of aircraft, seats, increase of seats, but also new airlines that have yet to serve. We've got a lot of great dialogue with carriers that aren't here yet. And so the future just, it is tremendously optimistic. And I think that what we will end up with is a very solid, sustainable base of air service that is directed around the Memphis operation. It's no longer Delta's hub. It's now Memphis's hub. And that's important.
And that legacy of Delta, the kind of hangover, some would say. I mean, I still get people who say to me, I go and I look at the Delta options and it's just, demoralizing because there are no flights going out of Memphis because there are so few Delta flights. And there's still people who aren't kind of viewing it, I think you would say, I think you've said before on the show, well, it's not a Delta hub and you got to look at everybody. There are all these different airlines. But when do people forget that? They almost need to forget the days when we had 300, destination or 300 flights a day going through here, or out of here on Delta.
It'll take some time. Quite frankly, if you look at any airport that's been dehubbed, whether it's Nashville in the early 90s with American when they dehubbed, whether it's St. Louis with TWA, you look at the history, there's that transition period. We're in that transition period. But as we introduce new flights, as we discuss our new product line and our opportunities with the public, as we bring out new products to allow them opportunities to see what flights we have, that retraining will occur, and we'll continue to deliver the message. And over time, I think that the community will tend to look at all of those options when they look to travel, and that's a very good, healthy thing.
I want to come back to some of the specifics about the new airlines who've come in and new offerings and so on, but I'll get Pace in here and we'll harp on Delta a little bit longer because there is this among a lot of people, some real bitterness about how things worked out with Delta. There's sort of famously the Delta Does Memphis web page, with people just ranting and furious and so on. I mean, your take, you've been on the board a couple years now, your take on how all that played out with Delta.
Well, Memphis dealt with a harsh reality that we weren't alone in facing. Part of the consolidation in this industry has led to lots of airports like Memphis feeling the same kinds of effects of living in an environment post-dehubbing of an airline. So that downsizing, it is past us. It's hard for a lot of us to forget because we really were spoiled with, if you will, a bit of an overachievement of air service that only a hub could generate for a town. But you have to remember that a lot of those airplanes, there might have been 50 seats on the aircraft. There were only 3 or 4 people originating or destined origin to Memphis. So now that it's gone, it makes sense. It's going to be very hard to rebuild a platform that large. And we've got a team under Scott's leadership that is focused on building back the infrastructure, providing affordable and convenient air service. And I think it's going to take time, but with enough progress steps, I think we're going to get back to a critical mass that we can still be proud of for Memphis.
I remember your predecessor once removed, so you've taken over for Jack Sammons, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But prior to him, Arnold Pearl, the longtime airport authority, and I remember he and I think you, Scott, we did an editorial meeting at the Daily News offices talking about changes, talking about the high cost of flights in Memphis. We were one of the most expensive, and Arnold in the awkward situation of having to say, look, in so many words, and I hate to put words in a, it's going to take Delta cutting back before we get cheap service or a more affordable service and more options. You can't have both. Is that, I mean, that's where we are?
Well, I think in some sense that was correct, but Delta had this option of consolidating into Atlanta, and it didn't take a lot of a prediction to see that could have evolved and that would be a natural outlay of the consolidation that was occurring in the industry. And though they promised otherwise, we all wanted to hear what we wanted to hear, but they delivered what was best for their stock, best for their shareholders, and best for their business, and it hurt Memphis. But now we're building.
Now we're building. Okay, my last question on Delta, because you said it, and I get people say Delta lied to Memphis.
Yeah, I wasn't on the front lines watching at the time whatever promises were made, but I think their intentions might have been to try to keep a relief valve market available to them in Memphis. But as the economy got tough and push came to shove, and their industry was trying to respond to what it took for its profitability, we took it on the chin. There's really no other soft pedaling of what happened.
And I harp on this, and I think sometimes this frustrates you, Scott, but because I hear it so much, and people still are so stung by that. But let's go to some of the things that have, as Arnold said in that meeting many years ago, he said, there is the opportunity to bring in more airlines, but Delta is, again, I'm paraphrasing what Arnold said, they're crowding out a lot of people. Well, now, list the number of airlines that are serving Memphis at this time. It's far more, in a way, than there were 5 years ago.
Well, it is. And we now have not only the legacy carriers, we have the Delta, the New American, which is still combining with U.S. Air.
Right.
We have United. We have Southwest Airlines. And then we have added Frontier to the mix. We've added now Allegiant. We've got OneJet coming. We've got Seaport, which is offering a different type product. So we're slowly adding new carriers to the mix. And and one of the things that I will say is that unlike other hub closures, ours took about 4.5 years to get complete.
Yeah.
Which some people referred to, and I myself referred to it as death by 1,000 cuts.
Yeah.
Some people said it would have been easier to do it all at once. It actually gave us a benefit financially and operationally to do it more slowly.
Yeah.
Although it did delay the recovery we're seeing now with new entrants.
Right. So, but some of that is tied to. Some of that was tied to, a global recession, right? And huge cutbacks. So some the two things were not unrelated. As Pace was saying, they needed, all the airlines felt like they needed to cut back. They had shareholders to satisfy, but now as the economy is better and is somewhat recovered and is continuing to recovering, do you see more airlines coming in, and do you see more service being offered by the range of brands that are here?
I actually do, and we're in actually a good position from a standpoint of where we are on air service and airfares, because we have opportunity, we have demand that is yet unserved, and we still have relatively high airfares. We're out of the top 10. But they're still relatively high. So they offer a new entrant a chance to come in, offer lower fares for a new service to capture that demand that's there and not being served. So they have a much more optimistic view of coming into Memphis.
Yeah.
Less competition, so they don't have to worry about someone trying to push them out of the market when they come in. So it is actually a very good opportunity from a standpoint of us marketing Memphis as a destination.
Let's go. Let's start with prices. I think what you guys put out here is that in the fourth quarter, where were we here? The flights, average flights out of Memphis were 437. The national average was in 383. So we're maybe roughly 10% above the national average, but out of, as you said, that top 10 most expensive airlines to fly out of. Is that roughly?
Yes, and
correct?
I think we're probably now about $75 less than the top,
Okay.
the highest airfares in the country.
Right.
So we're not where we want to be,
Right.
but we're moving in the right direction, and we're one of the few airports in that in the fourth quarter that actually had reduction in fares.
Right.
Most actually had an uptick, had an increase, and so we're going in the right direction. That was without the start of Allegiant.
Yeah.
And so as we continue to add competitive pressure to the market, it should help us move further down that list. And, and quite frankly, that's a good thing to do as we're ending service.
Right.
So.
Let's go. I want to come back to some numbers in a second, but Pace, from you in your real job, in your full job, you run hotels, brands. We were talking before, the Hilton brands, franchises. So from a business person's point of view, I mean, there are a lot of complaints for companies based in Memphis that, I can't get my people where they need to be for meetings and so on and so forth. What's your sense of the business community, and are they embracing all these changes? Are they happy? What's your sense from what you hear with other business associates?
Yeah, I think you're correct to characterize that there's a frustration in the business community of not enough destinations like we used to have with Delta. But what Scott was referring to in terms of the platform that we have now to grow, let's just take two airlines in particular and think about what they're offering. And 2 years ago they weren't here and weren't contributing this way. But Southwest, who's now got a couple of year foothold here and is doing a great job, came in, initially talked about 3 cities, went immediately to 5 cities initially, and then added a Dallas route as well. It's picked up. It's doing very, very well. And the business community is embracing it and saying great things about it. And it's certainly showing up in the declining airfares that we talked about. Another example is Allegiant. These are 3 markets that we desperately want to have nonstop traffic to in the way of Las Vegas and Orlando and Fort Lauderdale. And it's been such a dearth, so long since we had any service to Fort Lauderdale. And fantastically well embraced. And my hope is that, like in Southwest, where initially they came and liked it and are starting to grow, that the same thing will happen with Allegiant. They'll add more frequencies, they'll potentially consider other destinations, and we'll grow from there. So these are the kinds of things that the business community was looking for, is pleased to see coming, and they want to see more of.
And is it partly, just a cultural I traveled for business recently, and I flew out on Frontier and back on US Air. It's different. Again, it's different. You might lose your mile status and with Delta. You might, there's all that kind of stuff that the business community doesn't necessarily want, but you have to just be a little bit more creative in terms of how you fly.
I think so. It has to happen exactly like you experienced. So you have to try it. Right. So a lot of people were almost addicted to the frequency program of Delta Airlines and have trouble waking up the next day and saying, well, this is not a great offering for me anymore. How am I going to experiment with those? I'm loyal. I'm not used to this. But once you try it and realize you can go one way on Frontier and come back another way through a US Air, you realize, hey, loyalty's great, but I've got to do what's best for affordability for my company. I've got to do what's best for convenience and saving my time. And if I spread it around and figure out who I can help drive their repeat business, I'm going to be better off than worrying about my own frequency needs. Right,
I got you. Let's shift to some numbers, and we'll put a slide up that just shows some of the numbers that you track in terms of the number of flights out of Memphis, both in terms of passenger travel, but also, obviously, huge tenant of the airport is FedEx and all that's going on there. You feel good, and this gets into the finances of the airports and the fees that are paid to keep the airport going. You feel good through, I think, April, May, about where volume is and all the things, the metrics you look at for the airport?
I do, and it's very good. FedEx is continuing what they do. They're very stable, very sound, very good, moderate growth mode. The passenger side of the shop, we've seen the growth. We're beyond the cuts of Delta, if you will, and now we're seeing the growth of new carriers, new flights, and that all, we've got a financial stability. We've been stable.
Right.
There's not been a period through any of these changes that we've not had financial stability. what we have now is a little bit better predictability, if you will, in our future as to how we can bring our costs down and make it even more affordable for those that we're trying to court into the Memphis market.
And on the slide, which I don't think you could see, but it's just kind of the standard sort of numbers, a couple points. One is it mentions the number of autos parked in the garage.
Yeah.
So the garage, which was finished right as all this was going on, and in some ways, and you and I have talked about it before, got muddied up with the conversation, I think from your point of view and the airport authority's point of view, with the conversation about Delta. So you had people saying, why would the airport build this massive, expensive garage when Delta's cutting all its flights? Talk about how the big garage is doing financially, why it was built, and so on.
The economy parking lot, the ground transportation center, if you will, which houses not only the economy parking, but also rental cars, doing phenomenally well. We have seen tremendous growth. That was not built for the hub transfer passenger. It was built for the Memphis origin and destination market. And that market really hasn't changed from a standpoint of less travelers.
Right.
With the economy, we did see a slight downtick, but the reality is that we are now growing on that base, and the garage was built for the future base of travelers that we believe we will have in Memphis. None of those people that were getting off one plane and getting on another plane cared whether we had a parking lot that was convenient and close and inexpensive.
Right.
So we built that for two reasons. One, we needed parking capacity, and the other reason is for customer service, to bring that product closer to home on the side of the airport, and to bring covered parking to a greater volume of our spaces. So it's relatively cheap at $6 a day, and very convenient. So it's a great product.
And from a board point of view, I mean, were you frustrated by the criticisms that were a little misguided in the sense of why you building for a garage for people?
I think it took a while to get our message out. I think one really wonderful example of how successful it's been has been the rental car companies all consolidating in that facility, elimination of all the buses and all the gas money and all the pollution that might come with such a thing, and now everything's contained. We saw this trend in a lot of airports. It's really wonderful, and in our case, we freed up all that property along Democrat Road, which was where the rental agencies were, to be used by other major tenants of the airport. Yeah. So it's a win-win.
Right, and part was FedEx took some of that land. Is that correct?
I think over time they're definitely looking at that. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Talk about FedEx. I mean, obviously the importance of them to the airport. I mean, is that, I've heard people say it's kind of a silly thing, but well, that's really what the airport's about. All this other stuff is just, kind of a sideshow. Well, is that your point of view, that really the airport's all about FedEx? And
I think FedEx provides the kind of insulation from the air passenger impact that enables us to maintain our good health financially, viability-wise, when air passenger side stuff is stressed like it's been. But I consider our mission to be two-pronged, and we feel very fortunate, very lucky when we go out and talk to peers that are at other airports. They all say, yeah, you're crying the blues about air passenger service, or you wish you had this route or that route, but boy, you've got something that none of us have, and that's that FedEx. So in the middle of the night, your airport comes alive and it's strong. And we have a lot to be proud of on that side. But I think our dual mission is air passenger traffic, and we won't consider ourselves completely successful until we have that ginning, as well as we enjoy FedEx's success in the middle of the night. We'd like to see our daytime traffic pick up tremendously. Right.
We talk a little bit more about 7-8 minutes left in the show here. Some of the other changes at the airport, we talked about the ground transportation hub and some of the connector between the main terminal and the garage. But there's a big renovation of the airport underway. Talk about what's being done and in the big picture, and we'll kind of get into some specifics.
Well, as we move forward with the downsizing of the Delta operation, the move towards a origin and destination market, we looked at the airport and we knew we had to consolidate operations. And we talked to the airlines about that, and everyone agreed. And so we looked to moving forward with putting all of our airlines on the B concourse.
Which is, just to orient people, is the main, when you come in the main door, was the old Delta Northwest primary kind of terminal. Okay,
and
not the ones
Main
off to the
Street,
side.
if you will. It's the center of the building. It's the largest concourse, has the Y. And as a part of that discussion, we said, okay, this building has done wonderful things for this airport for 50 years, but it's aging. What do we need to do to move forward for the next 50 years? And so we're moving forward on a program to modernize the facility that you see today. The first step of that will be the Concourse B modernization. And that will be a program that will provide wider corridors, more natural light, moving walkways, more customer-friendly hold rooms where the passengers sit and wait to board the plane. Tremendous better customer service model, and something that we believe that this community will be proud of, and we want Memphis International Airport to be the airport of choice for this community for the next 50 years.
Yeah.
So it's a tremendous program that we're embarking on right now.
Some of it is again, I flew recently, and there's a lot more action on the I can't remember which side I was on, but it's interesting out on the sides now because Frontier's out there and some of these new airlines.
Concourse,
yeah, the C Concourse, and so there's all that over there, and then you go down that main B Concourse, and it feels a little ghost townish. And then you get out there, but some of that has been because, and I've heard people say, gosh, it's such a ghost town there, and I've tried to say, well, I guess I'm a nerd and I'm into this and I read about it. They're reconfiguring everything, and they're reconfiguring everything into the B Concourse, and I guess people haven't quite fully embraced that or realized that that's about to happen.
Well, you have to realize this downsizing occurred in the middle of a 4-year total reconstruction of our passenger airline parking apron. Outside of the concourse where the planes park, we have been replacing all of that pavement. So our opportunities to relocate airlines to a more central location has really been impeded by those projects. And so until we get that done, it's very difficult. So we've got Southwest on A, Delta, and Allegiant on B, and then all the other carriers, US Air, American, are combining, United, Frontier, so they're on C, and so from an appearance standpoint, at different times of the day, each concourse looks a little ghost townish. When we bring them all together, the perspective will be totally different.
Right, and I guess for the vendor's point of view too. I mean, because they get all, if you have a barbecue shop or you have a newsstand, you want to concentrate everyone because you're just going to increase your business.
And that's what we're going to do. We're going to bring everybody to B. We're going to bring all the vendors to B. And now Main Street will be robust, active, and vibrant.
And B and C, A and C, the two side ones will be mothballed?
They will be closed pending further decision on what to do with those. And a lot of that will do with how we grow. Okay. With what the future looks like.
Okay. And from your point of view, I mean, these aesthetic improvements, I mean, I guess as a board chair, as a board member, you've got to make sure, I mean, not that Scott doesn't have to look at the dollars and cents, but that's part of that makes sense? I mean, this is a reasonable and financially appropriate set of changes?
Yeah, I think so. We have a planning and development committee that has spoken to this and spent a lot of time on it, working with the designers, and we're really still very much. It's a very long-term plan. It's gonna take a full 5 years to implement this concourse modernization plan, but I think it makes sense. Part of it is Field of Dreams. You know, if we build the right thing, we think it's going to help our mission of getting more and more airlines to come. So part of it is betting on the future, but I think it's a compelling concept to improve it, to bring it all together, and to make the B Concourse the concourse, and make Main Street really ring and resound and have a livelihood, a life to it. I think it's going to be a whole different environment.
Yeah. This may be off left field, but just a couple minutes left here. You had mentioned emissions, you'd mentioned the trucks, but some big emissions requirements are coming out for airlines. How does that they need to start cutting their emissions potentially based on EPA, so that everybody from FedEx to the passenger airlines, does that impact you all? I mean, in any particular way? I mean, or do you just sort of watch those trends and see how the airlines respond?
Well, we look at our carbon footprint, and then we do things in conjunction with the big picture in Memphis. So looking at how we can assist our airlines in cutting emissions by removing some of the equipment that runs independently on the apron for ground power or for preconditioned air, where we can do that in a way that is much more efficient to assist our air carriers. And in looking at how we deliver some of those functions, although the largest piece of that is the more efficient aircraft, as they replace their fleets and upgrade their fleets, that carbon footprint's coming down as they do things to improve their operations. So over time, we all are working in concert, if you will,
Right.
to make inroads on reducing that carbon footprint. So it's overall a very good program.
We didn't talk about, I'm jumping around, but we didn't talk about Seaport and is it Southern Airlines, the smaller ones? Is Southern flying out of Memphis or are they flying out of DeSoto County?
No, they're flying out of Memphis.
Okay.
Southern Express
They are small,
is flying
kind of
out of
turboprop planes.
Yes. Southern Express is flying out of Signature Flight Support.
Okay.
Seaport, which is a small 8-passenger turboprop aircraft, is flying out of both Signature Flight Support and
Right.
the terminal.
Right.
And then we have a new airline coming June 22nd, OneJet, which is a small, actually jet aircraft.
Yeah.
A 7-passenger it's a business jet, if you will.
Right.
And so they're going to be flying. I look at it as plenty. We're back to our future when aviation was growing around smaller markets, smaller airplane, more point-to-point
Right.
coverage, and we're building that model now around what Memphis needs.
Right, because as the big, and this is a big issue that we don't have enough time for, but the big airlines focusing on big cities, spoke and hub, how do you get from
Yes.
mid-sized city to mid-sized city? Okay. Scott Brockman, thanks for being here. Pace Cooper, thank you for being here. Thank you for joining us. Join us again next week. Good night.
DHG is a full-service accounting firm serving Memphis and the Mid-South region for more than 60 years, combining community involvement with the technical resources of a national firm. For more information, visit dhgllp.com.